So this is our video of our rehearsal for the lesson that we are presenting in class on Thursday. So this is lesson plan number 2. This is our rehearsal for that. So let's get started. So today in class we will be talking about ethics in journalism. We have previously, like you remember, we have gone over the Society of Professional Journalism's Code of Ethics. But just as we start off today's lesson, and we will get to an exercise, but we're just going to review the Code of Ethics first. So like we've previously talked about in class, Society of Professional Journalism has a code of ethics that all journalists follow, whether it be in broadcast for television or whether it be in any type of print journalism. And there are 4 main sections of the code of ethics. So there is seek the truth and report it, there is minimize harm, there's act independently and be accountable. So under each of these 4 sections, there are many different examples as to what ethical codes that the journalists are supposed to follow, but these are the 4 main headings within the Code of Ethics.
So the first one is seek the truth and report it. So journalists should really strive to be, 100% upfront and honest with their readership, because you really risk losing that audience and that credibility if for some reason you're not being fully honest with your coverage. You should also never distort the content of the news or footage or audio. You really need to be open about everything. You need to be open about who your sources are. You need to be open about how you're acquiring that information and why. Another thing that goes under this category is never plagiarizing. It's easy to say that plagiarizing is bad, but it does happen in media, and every year there's someone from the New York Times, the LA Times, that is caught plagiarizing from either an AP story or just making up sources altogether. So we really need to be aware that plagiarizing also means taking anything from a press release. You need to be really cautious as a reporter in terms of what you're putting out there, and you need to make sure that it's your own. Journalists also really need to be cautious of minimizing harm, which means that an ethical journalist would treat sources and subjects as well as your colleagues, as humans, because that's what they are, and you can't think that you're above another person just because you're trying to get the scoop on a story. At the end of the day, you need to respect that person as well as their privacy, and you need to show compassion for the people that may be affected by the news coverage. So, example would be children or people who are not in the limelight as much and might not be aware in terms of what it means to be on or off the record, as well as things that might be privacy issues. For example, there's been lots of examples with rape cases where newspapers have printed names of women who have been sexually violated, and that's something you should never do, because that's just like a complete violation of their privacy, and you need to be aware in terms of what you're writing and think about it in the long run. Put yourself in that. Put yourself in those shoes. Would you be okay if someone wrote that about you? And you also need to be aware of who this person is. If they're a public official, if they're a politician or a celebrity, they relinquish some of their rights to privacy rather than just Joe Schmo down the street. You really have to, be more cautious about what you're putting in terms of that.
Okay, so the next section would be act independently. So journalists should be free of obligation to any interest other than the public's right to know. So this usually comes down to whether the story is needed to know by the public. Like, does the public have to know this information? So some stories may be fillers, some stories may be just entertainment pieces, but should the public know about something that is going on? And if not, maybe it isn't necessarily news. Another instance would be avoid conflicts of interest. So there are situations where a news editor knows a friend and they might be able to have a story covering their business to create revenue for their specific business. See, that's considered a conflict of interest because it's benefiting a close friend of the news editors. So situations like that should never occur, and you should never do favors for certain people. And that actually goes into the next one, which is refuse gifts, favors, fees, or special treatment from any of your sources. So even if they want to buy you coffee, if they want to loan you a car for a day, or if you were going on a news story specifically for them, it's something along those lines that you should never do as a journalist.
And in my own experience working as a journalist at the Tampa Bay Times, their sports reporters, when you're up in the box in a big stadium, they'll give you free food. And what a lot of publications do is they will send one check at the end of the season for what they estimate all of the food to be. So instead of paying for each individual game, but so yeah, newspapers take into account everything because they don't want anyone, whether it just be a $5 cup of coffee or a full meal, to get in the way of how they cover something.
And then the fourth section is be accountable. So a lot of journalists have to be accountable towards their readers, their listeners, their viewers, and each other. The news is a very wide spectrum, and a lot of people take it in every single day, so it affects a lot of people's lives. So if you do have something that is not correct, then you need to take it accountable upon yourself to make sure that you do get the right information out there, or you don't broadcast it or cover it at all. So it's correct, and that you're making sure that you are holding yourself accountable for any of the information that is broadcasted or printed. The next one is admit mistakes and correct them promptly. So yes, it does happen. We're all humans. People do make mistakes, and especially if your job is being a journalist, you will make a mistake and you will report something incorrectly. And then it is up to you, like we said, to take yourself accountable and to correct them, and either say that you just made the mistake and that the information was incorrect, or find the correct information. And then finally, expose unethical practices of journalists and news media. You don't really want to be a tattletale in this instance, but it is up to you to make sure that journalism in itself stays ethical, and that you don't have other problems arise from a fellow journalist because they need to be addressed and they're breaking their promise to society because they are producing the news.
An example of that would be Stephen Glass, who is a really well-known, young, promising journalist. When it was found that he was plagiarizing and making up stories, the newspaper and magazine that he worked for were obligated to go through every single story that he had ever written and ever had published to make sure if it actually happened. And all newspapers will go through every single thing that you write and print what you made up or what you plagiarized. So, it's really the best interest of the newspaper to hold themselves accountable and keep other journalists in check as well.
Okay, so now that we have done our review of the four main sections, we're actually going to go into our exercise.
So I need everyone to get out their cell phones, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple different scenarios. Some of them are longer than others, and not everyone's going to agree in some of those, and just be honest with what you would do in this situation, and then we'll talk about it. But what we're going to do is we're going to read through the scenario, and then you are going to text in a number, either a yes or no, or it's going to be a short response into a poll everywhere, and then we'll take a look at them on the board, and we'll just talk about it.
We have new information now also on the plane crash. KTVU has just learned the names of the 4 pilots who were on board the flight. They are Captain Sum Ting Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Ho Li Fook, and Bang Ding Ao. And the NTSB has confirmed these are the names of the pilots on board Flight 214 when it crashed. We are working to determine exactly what roles each of them played during the landing on Saturday. Involved in the Asiana Airlines crash, these names were not accurate despite an NTSB official in Washington confirming them late this morning. We apologize for this error.
Tonight, we want to take a moment and say that we are sorry. Earlier today, during our noon newscast, we misidentified the pilots in the Asiana Airlines crash. We made several mistakes when we received this information. First of all, we never read the names out loud, phonetically sounding them out. Then during our phone call to the NTSB, where the person confirmed the spellings of the names, we never asked that person to give us their position within the agency. We heard this person verify the information without questioning who they were, and then we rushed the names onto our noon newscast. Within the last few minutes, the NTSB issued this statement, quote, "The National Transportation Safety Board apologizes for inaccurate and offensive names that were mistakenly confirmed as those of the pilots. A summer intern acted outside the scope of his authority when he erroneously confirmed the names of the flight crew on the aircraft. We work hard to ensure that only appropriate factual information regarding an investigation is released, and we deeply regret today's incident. Appropriate actions will be taken to ensure that such a serious error is not repeated." Now, even with this statement from the NTSB, we want you to know here we accept full responsibility for this mistake. We issued an apology later in the noon newscast. We also apologized on our website and on our social media sites. The fact is, we have a lot of good people here at Channel 2, and on behalf of all of us, I want to tell you that we pride ourselves on getting it right and having the highest of standards and integrity. Clearly, today, that did not happen. We made a mistake. So again, from all of us here at KTVU, we can only offer our sincerest apology in this case.
So in this instance, we're going to have the students respond and via text. So they would text to 22333, and then if they believe that this news station handled it ethically, they would text the number 634714. And then if the students believe that it was unethical and they did not handle it how they were supposed to, they would text 634715. So obviously in this instance, as a rehearsal, this is what would happen, but we're going to go ahead to the next example.
And then we would exit the
PowerPoint slide and would refer to the poll everywhere results, and then would discuss it with the class, and then we would move to the next example.
Okay, for the next example, your editor's neighbor has been violently ill, and every week she reminds your editor that her sickness seems to correspond with when she eats prepared meals that she buys from a supermarket. So your editor is suspicious that there could be some health violations going on, and your editor meets with you and asks you to undercover and investigate his neighbor's claims by using audio or recording equipment. So would you, as a class, not as a class, but individually, would you go undercover to cover this story? And text your response to 634705, and then we'll talk about it.
Yep, and once again, we would exit the PowerPoint slides. We'd bring up another tab that was the poll everywhere results, and we'd find a few that were either contradictory, where they would cover it, or where they wouldn't cover it, and then we'd talk about what the actual instance would be, which in this case, you never go undercover, and it's...
That's the fine line, because there could be several instances where you think it is entirely in the public interest, and there is enough proof that you think you need to go undercover, and you have done everything you possibly can to try to talk to a source, and they won't talk to you. So if you're finding public record after public record that is saying that they have missed these health, codes, and you haven't gotten an official to talk to you for, maybe 6 months, maybe it is time to consider, if people really are getting sick and it's corresponding, to think about it. But in this case, you'd have to really ask the class, is this even news? Maybe the neighbor just, gets sick and maybe has absolutely nothing to do with the supermarket at all. In this case, you should not go undercover, because there isn't any evidence to back it, and we would explain that to the class as well.
Okay, so for the third example, the city of Detroit is hosting the FIFA World Cup soccer matches. Suddenly, Ryan Schmachte, a FIFA security guard, sprints toward a smoking school bag. He dives and hurls the knapsack into some nearby woods. Moments later, the bag explodes. Now your new assignment is to cover Schmachte, who looks like he just saved the day. But in a week that follows, you receive a call from one of your most trusted confidential sources, an FBI agent. He tells you that the FBI is investigating Schmachte, and he fits the profile of someone who would set the whole thing up just so he could look like a hero. Just as you hang up the phone, your editor tells you that CNN, the New York Times, and other major news outlets are reporting that the FBI is investigating Schmachte. How do you cover this story? So once again, we would have the students text the number 6340706 and then their short response about how they would cover the story to 22333. And then once again, we would exit out. We would pull up the other tab of the Poll Everywhere results, and we would discuss it just like the previous examples.
So for this example, your TV news station is desperately struggling with revenue and debt, and a private investment firm purchases the biggest share in your company. Your editor meets in a boardroom with a top executive from the popular restaurant chain Wedgies. The executive tells them what stories Wedgies would like to see appear in a special package that's going to be featured on your TV station that it's about to run. The pieces cover the opening of a new basketball arena named after named after Wedgies. Besides purchasing the arena's name rights and being a major advertiser for the story package, Wedgies owns. They own a 40% stake in your media company. So after your editor meets with the executive, she assigns you to produce a story package, which your TV station plans to run in the most popular news hour. So in this instance, we would have the students write a short text response to the 6340707, how they would handle writing that package for to go to air on TV. And then we would pull up the Poll Everywhere and see where people lie in terms of if they think that is ethical, if it's unethical, how they would approach the story. And in this case, we would really hope to see that students would want to be upfront with their viewers about what it means, and we'd be really looking to see if students are being honest with their readers or honest with their viewers, saying, look, this is happening. They also do own, 40% of our media company. You just need to be upfront, and that's what we'd hope we would see in terms of the Poll Everywhere for that example.
And as for example 5, recently George Zimmerman, Casey Anthony, Oscar Pistorius, and many others have had high-profile court cases that have resulted in hours of news coverage. In the justice system, it is established that everyone should have the right to a fair trial. Do you believe that having live broadcasts of these cases is considered ethical? And support your answer. So once again, in this response, the students would text in their short responses, and we would go to the Poll Everywhere, and we would see whether or not they believe it is fair that these people who were previously not high-profile people who put themselves in the limelight, but it eventually came about that through these court cases, they became these public figures. So we would go through the results, we'd see what everybody has to say, and then we would have a short discussion. And finally, for example number 6, you're an Associated Press photographer and you're visiting New York City. Suddenly a plane slams into the Twin Towers. You arrive at the scene just before the tower collapse, and you start snapping photos of people as they dive from top windows. The first question would be, should media outlets publish these photos of the people jumping from the top windows? And the second question would be, if you ran the photos, would you alter them to remove any recognizable features? So once again, we would go to the Poll Everywhere results. We would discuss whether or not media outlets should publish the photos. And then when it comes to if they were to publish the photos, if they would remove any of the recognizable features, which is incorrect because you're never supposed to edit footage or any of the features of photos.
And I think we are anticipating the biggest split of opinion in this example, mainly because it is something that people remember so vividly when that actually did happen, when photos ran in the New York Times of people who were actually identified later on. But again, we would really like to see that they would choose to not alter the photos. In terms of publishing the photos, this is where it's hard, where it's going to be a yes or no answer, because some might choose that it would be okay to run the photos, but if they weren't on the front page, and another person would say that you could run the photos online if there was like a disclaimer before the slideshow starts. So this one could have the biggest split in opinion.
Okay, so then once we have completed all 6 of the examples, we will ask the class if they have any other questions, concerns, or comments, if they would like to return to any of the previous examples, if they themselves know of any examples that have come about recently that is an ethical dilemma in whether it's print broadcast or news broadcast, and then we would conclude the lesson and send them on their way, and that would be our lesson plan number 2. So thanks for tuning in to our rehearsal for our lesson plan number 2, and we will be presenting it in class on Thursday.
What was our time on that?
So thanks for watching, and we're going to check how long it took us. Thanks.